When he said those words, my entire life shattered into 1,000 pieces. The laughter that followed felt like shards of glass cutting through my chest. Each chuckle from the crowd a fresh wound that would never fully heal. That billionaire thought he could humiliate me in front of everyone. Thought he could use his money and power to crush someone he saw as beneath him. He had no idea who I really was. But let me take you back to the beginning, to that moment when everything changed. Because what happened next didn't just transform one night at a charity gala. It exposed the ugly truth about wealth, privilege, and what we truly value in this world. The San Francisco Grand Ballroom glittered like a jewelry box that night. Crystal chandeliers worth more than most houses hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting prismatic light across the marble floors. Tech billionaires in custom biryani suits mingled with venture capitalists draped in designers I couldn't pronounce. The air smelled of expensive perfume, aged scotch, and the particular scent of old money meeting new tech fortunes. I moved through the crowd with a silver tray of champagne flutes, each glass worth $40. My black uniform was crisp and professional, my hair pulled back in a tight bun that made my head ache. I'd been working at these high-end catering jobs for 3 months now, ever since the restaurant where I'd been playing piano closed down. The pay was decent, the hours brutal, and the treatment ranged from invisibility to outright contempt. Harrison Blackwell stood at the center of the room, like a king holding court. At 53, he'd made his billions in artificial intelligence, selling his company to one of the tech giants for a sum that made headlines for weeks. His salt and pepper hair was styled perfectly, his Patek Philippe watch caught the light with every gesture, and his charcoal suit probably cost more than I'd made in the last 6 months combined. His daughter Vanessa stood beside him in an emerald dress that hugged her figure like it had been painted on. 23 years old Juilliard graduate, and already performing at respected venues across the country. Her diamond necklace sparkled as she laughed at something her father said, the sound carrying that particular note of someone who's never known real struggle. The charity gala was raising money for arts education in underprivileged schools. The irony wasn't lost on me. These people would write checks for hundreds of thousands, pat themselves on the back for their generosity, then climb into cars that could fund an entire school's music program for a year. I was refilling champagne glasses near the stage when I heard it. The background music, a string quartet playing in the corner, had shifted into a Chopin nocturne. But something was off. The cellist was dragging the tempo, pulling against the natural flow of the piece. It was subtle, the kind of thing most people wouldn't notice, but to someone who'd spent their entire life immersed in music, it was like watching someone walk with a limp. I didn't mean to say anything. I really didn't, but I'd been trained since childhood to hear these things, to fix them, to make music breathe the way it was meant to. So, when Marcus Thompson, the hotel manager, passed by, checking on the service, I leaned in slightly. "Excuse me, Mr. Thompson," I said quietly, keeping my voice low and professional. "The quartet might need a brief break. The cellist seems to be struggling with the tempo on the Chopin. Perhaps some water or a moment to tune." Marcus looked at me with surprise. In 3 months, I'd been the model of a silent, efficient server. "You can tell that?" he asked. "I have some musical background," I said, offering a small smile. "Just a suggestion, of course." What I didn't see was Harrison Blackwell standing right behind us. What I didn't hear was how my words carried farther than I'd intended in a momentary lull in the conversation around us. "A cocktail waitress with opinions on classical music?" His voice cut through the air like a blade, loud enough that several groups of people turned to look. "How fascinating!" My stomach dropped. I turned slowly, the tray of champagne suddenly feeling impossibly heavy in my hands. Harrison Blackwell was staring at me with a mixture of amusement and contempt, one eyebrow raised, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "I apologize, sir," I said, keeping my voice steady even as my heart hammered against my ribs. "I didn't mean to." "No, no, please," he interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. The Rolex on his wrist flashed. "Do enlighten us. Tell me, does your extensive education from—" He paused, making a show of looking me up and down. Wherever it is people like you learn about music, does it qualify you to critique professional musicians? Heat flooded my face. More people were turning now, pulled by the spectacle. I could feel dozens of eyes on me. Some curious, some embarrassed for me, some eager to see how this would unfold. Dad, Vanessa appeared at his elbow, touching his arm lightly. But there was amusement in her eyes too, not concern. You're being terrible. I'm being honest, Harrison said, his voice growing louder, more theatrical. I'm simply curious about the depths of talent we have serving drinks tonight. Perhaps our dear server here thinks she could do better than trained professionals. My hands tightened on the tray. 8 years of working in bars, restaurants, and hotels had taught me to swallow pride, to smile through insults, to remember that I needed this job. But something in his tone, in the casual cruelty of his mockery, in the way he said people like you as if I were a different species, made something snap inside me. I was merely making an observation, Mr. Blackwell, I said quietly. The tempo and consistency in measure 43 of the nocturne was affecting the harmonic resolution. I thought it might be helpful. The smile slipped from his face. Around us, I heard a few sharp intakes of breath. I'd just used technical language that proved I wasn't just some random person with an opinion. I'd shown knowledge that people like me, in his worldview, weren't supposed to have. His eyes narrowed. Well, well. We have a scholar among us. He turned to the crowd, which had grown larger, people drifting over to see what was happening. Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we've underestimated our service staff tonight. He turned back to me, and now there was something darker in his expression. This wasn't just amusement anymore. This was a man who'd been challenged, who'd been made to look foolish, and who had the power to crush anyone who dared to do so. You know what? His voice carried across the room now. At least 50 people were watching. I'm feeling generous tonight. Let's make this interesting. He gestured toward the grand piano that sat on the stage. A magnificent Steinway Model D that probably cost $250,000. That piano up there? If you can play it better than my daughter, who graduated top of her class from Juilliard and has performed at venues around the world, I'll marry you right here, right now. Laughter erupted around us. It started with a few chuckles and grew into a wave of amusement that washed over the ballroom. People were pulling out their phones, already anticipating the viral video of a server's humiliation. Vanessa laughed too, a bright, tinkling sound. Oh, Daddy, you're awful, she said. But she was smiling, enjoying the spectacle. Marcus rushed forward. Mr. Blackwell, I'm so sorry for any— No, Marcus. Harrison held up a hand, silencing him instantly. I insist. Let's give everyone here a show. Let's see if this young lady's opinions are backed by actual skill, or if she's just another person with a big mouth and nothing to back it up. The room felt like it was spinning. I could see the exits. Could imagine just walking away, putting down the tray and leaving this humiliation behind. But something stopped me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was the memory of every time someone had looked at me and seen only my uniform, my circumstances, never the person beneath. Or maybe it was the memory of Abuela Carmen, my grandmother sitting at our battered upright piano in the Bronx, her weathered hands still graceful on the keys despite arthritis. Tu música tiene alma, mi amor, she would say. Your music has soul. Never let anyone tell you it doesn't matter. I set down the tray of champagne on a nearby table. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was something else. Something that had been building for 8 years, through every dismissive glance, every assumption, every moment of being treated as less than. What's wrong? Harrison's voice dripped with mock concern. Having second thoughts? I understand if you'd rather just go back to serving drinks. I looked at him, really looked at him. At the expensive suit that couldn't hide the ugliness underneath. At the watch that told time but couldn't buy him more of it. At the smile that had probably never known genuine humility or real struggle. No, I said, and my voice was steady now, clear and strong. I'll play, The walk to that stage felt like crossing an ocean. Each step echoed in my ears, mixing with the whispers and laughter around me. Someone said, "This is going to be brutal." Someone else giggled. A phone camera flashed. I climbed the 3 steps to the stage. The piano waited there, black and gleaming, its lid open like the wing of some magnificent bird. I'd played on Steinways before, years ago, when I was someone different. When I was 16-year-old Maya Rodriguez, winner of the Van Cliburn International Piano Competition's junior division. When I had a future that looked nothing like serving drinks at events I could never afford to attend. But that was before Mom got sick. Before the medical bills piled up like snow in a blizzard. Before I made the choice to turn down a full scholarship to Curtis Institute of Music and stay home to work, to help, to survive. I sat at the bench, adjusted it slightly. My hands hovered over the keys, and for just a moment, I closed my eyes. I let myself remember. Abuela's apartment, the smell of her café con leche, the afternoon light slanting through the curtains. Her voice, "When you play, mi niñita, you tell a story. Make them feel it, make them understand." "Any preferences for what piece?" I asked, opening my eyes and looking at Harrison. My voice carried across the silent room. He laughed again, louder this time. "Surprise us, dear. Show us what talents the working class possesses." I smiled, then, a small smile that he couldn't interpret, couldn't understand, and then my fingers touched the keys. The first chord of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 in C minor filled the ballroom like a thunderclap. But this wasn't just playing. This was 8 years of emotion pouring out through my fingertips. This was every slight, every dismissive look, every moment of being invisible transformed into sound. The concerto is brutally difficult, requiring not just technical precision, but emotional depth, that many professionally trained pianists spend years trying to achieve. The opening chords demand power and control simultaneously. The melody that follows requires a delicate touch that can break your heart. My hands knew every note. They'd never forgotten. Through years of playing in dive bars and small restaurants, through sight-reading jazz standards for drunk wedding guests, through accompanying amateur singers who could barely hold a tune, my hands had remembered this. They'd been waiting for this moment. The music swelled and crashed around me like waves. I could feel the ballroom holding its breath. The technical passages came effortlessly, my fingers flying across the keys in patterns I'd practiced until they were as natural as breathing. But it was more than technique. Every note carried weight, carried meaning, carried the story of a girl who'd lost everything, and kept going anyway. I poured 8 years into that piano. The fear when Mom was diagnosed. The weight of medical bills that crushed our family's dreams. The decision to put my life on hold. The endless nights working double shifts. The times I'd pass music schools and feel my heart break all over again. The moments I'd hear music playing somewhere and have to walk away because it hurt too much. But also the strength, the resilience, the refusal to give up entirely. The stolen moments at bar pianos after closing, playing for myself when no one was watching. The sight-reading gigs that kept my skills sharp even as my dreams died. The determination to survive, to endure, to find meaning even when everything seemed meaningless. Around me, the room had transformed. I could feel it without looking. The laughter had died. The phone cameras were still recording, but now for different reasons. When I finally dared a glance, I saw faces frozen in shock, in awe, in something approaching wonder. Harrison Blackwell had gone pale. His mouth hung slightly open, the smirk completely vanished. Beside him, Vanessa had tears streaming down her face, though she didn't seem to realize it. She was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Horror perhaps, or recognition of something she'd never quite achieved in her own playing, despite all her expensive training. Marcus, the hotel manager, stood completely still, one hand pressed to his mouth. In 20 years of working at the Grand, he'd heard hundreds of performances. But this was different. This was something that couldn't be taught in schools or bought with money. An elderly woman in the front row had closed her eyes. tears tracking through her makeup, her hands clasped together as if in prayer. A tech mogul who probably hadn't felt genuine emotion in years stared with his drink frozen halfway to his mouth, forgotten. A venture capitalist's wife gripped her husband's arm so tightly her knuckles had gone white. I reached the final movement, the triumphant resolution that Rachmaninoff had written after emerging from his own depression. It speaks of hope, of redemption, of beauty that survives, despite everything trying to destroy it. My hands shaped each phrase with everything I had. Every ounce of skill I'd developed over years of playing, every emotion I'd suppressed for so long. The final chord hung in the air like a benediction. I held the sustain pedal down, letting it ring through the vast space, letting it fade naturally into the profound silence that followed. For 5 seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. The room existed in a bubble outside of time, suspended in the aftermath of what had just happened. Then someone started clapping. A single person, their applause echoing in the stillness. I turned to see an elderly Asian man in an elegant suit, his silver hair gleaming under the chandeliers, standing at the back of the room. Others joined him. Then more. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted in applause that made the crystal chandeliers tinkle. People rose to their feet, some still crying, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The applause continued, growing louder, more insistent. 4 minutes, the ovation lasted 4 full minutes. I stood slowly from the piano bench, my legs unsteady. I wiped my hands on my uniform, a gesture that felt absurdly mundane after what had just happened. As I descended the stage steps, the crowd parted before me like a wave, but my eyes found Harrison Blackwell. He stood frozen in place, his face a mask of confusion, and something approaching fear. This wasn't how the story was supposed to go. He was supposed to humiliate me, to prove his superiority, to put an uppity server in her place. Instead, he'd given me a stage, and I'd used it to reveal everything he wasn't. The elderly Asian man who'd started the applause made his way through the crowd toward us. He moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to respect, his eyes sharp and intelligent behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying authority despite its gentle tone. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced." He looked directly at Harrison. "Mr. Blackwell, I'm Dr. Michael Chen, artistic director of the New York Philharmonic." Harrison's face went from pale to ashen. Dr. Michael Chen was a legend in the classical music world, one of the most respected and influential figures in the industry. His approval could make careers. His criticism could end them. "Dr. Chen," Harrison managed, extending his hand with visible effort. What an unexpected pleasure, but Dr. Chen didn't take his hand. Instead, he turned completely toward me, his entire body language dismissing Harrison as if he didn't exist. "Young lady," he said, and his eyes were bright with emotion. "That was extraordinary. Truly extraordinary. Where did you study? Juilliard? Curtis? Moscow Conservatory?" My throat felt tight. "Actually, sir, I never attended a formal music school. I learned from my grandmother, who taught piano in the public schools in the Bronx." The surprise on Dr. Chen's face was genuine, quickly replaced by something deeper: respect, admiration, and perhaps a touch of sadness for all the years I'd been hidden away. "Remarkable," he said softly. "You have a rare gift, my dear. Exceedingly rare." "This is ridiculous," Vanessa burst out, her voice shrill. She'd recovered from her tears and now looked angry, embarrassed. She probably practiced that specific piece for months, knowing she'd be tested. Anyone can memorize one difficult piece if they work at it long enough. Dr. Chen turned to her with an expression that could have frozen water. "Is that so, Miss Blackwell? Tell me, how long did it take you to master the Rachmaninoff Second Concerto? And when you play it, do people weep? Do they stand and applaud for 4 minutes?" Vanessa's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "I have a suggestion," Dr. Chen continued, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "If Ms." He looked at me questioningly. "Rodriguez," I supplied quietly. "Maya Rodriguez. If Miss Rodriguez simply memorized this piece, then a proper test would be sight reading, the truest measure of a musician's skill. He reached into his leather portfolio bag. I received these this morning from a young Russian composer. It's a contemporary piece. No one has performed it publicly yet. Even I haven't heard it played. He pulled out sheet music and extended it toward me. If you can play this reasonably well, I will personally guarantee that you have access to every opportunity your talent deserves. Harrison practically exploded. This has gone far enough. This is a private charity event, not an audition. But Dr. Chen ignored him completely. His eyes locked on mine. The sheet music hung in the air between us, an offering and a challenge simultaneously. I took the pages. My eyes scanned quickly across the staves. The composition was complex, demanding, irregular rhythmic patterns, unexpected key changes, passages that required precise finger independence. It was designed specifically to expose frauds, to separate technical memorization from true musical understanding. Harrison saw an opportunity to regain control. "Fine," he said, his voice cutting. "Let's settle this once and for all. Let's see if this supposed talent holds up under actual pressure." Every eye in the room was on me again. But now, it felt different. After the Rachmaninoff, I wasn't just a server anymore. I was something else, something undefined but powerful. I walked back to the piano, placed the sheet music on the stand, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I allowed myself a genuine smile. What none of these people knew, what Harrison Blackwell couldn't possibly understand, was that sight reading was my superpower. It was how I'd survived for 8 years. When wedding pianists didn't show up and desperate event coordinators found me working in the kitchen, when jazz musicians handed me charts I'd never seen and expected me to come perfectly, when theater directors needed someone to play unfamiliar scores for last-minute auditions, I'd sight-read thousands of pieces under pressure, for money I desperately needed, in situations where failure meant not eating. The piece was challenging. Yes, but challenge was familiar territory. I began to play. The music that flowed from under my fingers was modern, experimental, full of unexpected harmonic progressions and rhythmic complexity. But my hands found the patterns instinctively. My mind, trained by years of necessity, processed the notation, almost faster than my eyes could track it. Each musical phrase emerged fully formed, as if I'd been playing this piece for years rather than seeing it for the first time. The composer had written something beautiful and strange, a meditation on displacement, on finding home in unfamiliar territories. The music shifted between haunting minor passages and moments of unexpected joy. It required complete concentration, but also intuition, the ability to understand where the music wanted to go, even before the notes were fully processed. I played it through without hesitation, without error. When I finished, the silence was even more profound than before. Dr. Chen's hands trembled as he clutched his portfolio. "My God," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "In 40 years, I've only seen 3 people sight-read at that level. You, my dear, are a genuine miracle." Harrison's face had gone from ashen to deep red. This was supposed to expose me. Instead, every test made him look worse. He was a man used to winning, to controlling every situation, and now he was watching his power crumble in real time. "Very impressive," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "Truly. But let's be honest here." He turned to address the crowd, playing to them like the performer he thought he was. "Talent doesn't pay bills, does it? I assume you're here serving drinks because these musical abilities haven't exactly led to a successful career. Sometimes reality has a way of humbling even the most skilled amateurs." It was a low blow, calculated to wound, to remind everyone of my position, my circumstances, to re-establish the hierarchy he needed to exist. I stood slowly from the piano bench, turned to face him fully, and for the first time since this began, I let my careful composure crack. Not with anger. Anger was what he expected, but with something colder, sharper, more dangerous. "You're absolutely right about one thing, Mr. Blackwell," I said, my voice carrying across the hushed room. "Talent doesn't pay bills. But it also doesn't buy character, integrity, or the ability to recognize value in people you've decided are beneath you. I took a step toward him. I am here serving drinks because 8 years ago, my mother was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. Because the medical bills were crushing our family. Because someone needed to work, and I chose to be that person. I turned down a full scholarship to one of the finest music conservatories in the country. Because love and responsibility mattered more than personal ambition. Another step. The room was absolutely silent. You look at me and see a server. Someone to mock. To use for entertainment, to humiliate in front of your wealthy friends. But that says nothing about me. It says everything about you. About your inability to imagine that worth exists outside of wealth. That dignity isn't determined by designer labels and expensive watches. Harrison opened his mouth, but I wasn't finished. I have spent 8 years working jobs that people like you barely notice exist. I've served drinks to people who looked through me like I was invisible. I've cleaned bathrooms, washed dishes, smiled through condescension and cruelty. And you know what? It never diminished me. Not once. Because my value isn't dependent on your approval or recognition. The elderly woman who'd cried during my performance started applauding. Others joined her, slowly at first, then building to another wave of support. How dare you, Vanessa stepped forward, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. You're just a server who got lucky. You've probably been rehearsing your whole life for a moment like this. Waiting to— Vanessa. Dr. Chen's voice cut through the air like a whip. Stop. You're making a fool of yourself. She recoiled as if slapped, tears springing to her eyes. For perhaps the first time in her privileged life, she'd been publicly rebuked. Marcus finally found his courage to intervene. Mr. Blackwell, perhaps we should all take a moment. No. The voice came from a woman I recognized but had never spoken to. Catherine Montgomery, president of the San Francisco Cultural Society, and coincidentally the host of this charity gala. She was 50, elegant, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Marcus, Miss Rodriguez will not be returning to her serving duties. Not tonight. Catherine walked toward me, her heels clicking on the marble floor. This evening is supposed to be about supporting young artistic talent. And here we have one, standing right in front of us, being treated like garbage simply because she had the audacity to work for a living. She turned to Harrison, and her expression was glacial. You should be ashamed, Harrison. Truly ashamed. Eleanor? You can't be serious. Harrison sputtered. I was just making a spectacle of cruelty, Catherine finished. Yes, I noticed. We all noticed. She looked around the room. Everyone here saw you attempt to humiliate a young woman for the crime of having knowledge while poor. How progressive of you. I blinked, confused by the sudden shift. No, ma'am. Just my work shifts. Cancel them. She looked at Dr. Chen. Michael, didn't you mention the New York Philharmonic has that special young artists concert next week? Lincoln Center. The name alone sent electricity through my body. The temple of American classical music, where legends were born, where careers were made. Dr. Chen, I don't know if I have appropriate repertoire prepared. If she doesn't have suitable performance attire, Vanessa burst out, her voice desperate. She has no experience with large audiences. She doesn't have— Catherine squeezed my hand. Our cultural society will cover everything you need. Rehearsal space, coaching if you want it, performance attire. All of it. This is exactly what our organization exists to do. Support genuine artistic talent regardless of background. I felt tears threatening to spill over. After 8 years of putting music second, of treating my gift as something to be hidden away, and only brought out when absolutely necessary for survival, someone was offering me a real chance. A legitimate opportunity to be seen as what I actually was. I accept, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Thank you. I gratefully accept. The applause that followed was different from before. This was approval, validation, hope. People smiled, genuine smiles now. not the anticipatory grins of those waiting for humiliation. But Harrison Blackwell wasn't done. He couldn't be. Men like him don't accept defeat. Especially not public defeat. Fine, he said loudly, forcing everyone's attention back to him. Take the offer. Perform at Lincoln Center if you want. But know this. He pointed at me, his fingers shaking with rage. I will be there. And I'll bring every important music critic I know, every newspaper, every magazine, every classical music blog I have connections with. And when you fail under real pressure, when you crumble on a real stage with real critics watching, instead of a bunch of drunk party guests, I will personally make sure everyone knows you were a fraud from the beginning. The threat hung in the air like poison. Harrison, that's enough, Catherine said sharply. That's a threat, Dr. Chen added, his voice cold. No, Harrison smiled, and it was an ugly thing. It's a promise. I've built an empire by recognizing true value, and I also know how to spot imposters. This girl might have fooled you tonight with her sob story and her parlor tricks, but she won't fool me. She'll break when the pressure is real. He turned to me, his eyes hard. See you Friday, Maya. Let's see if you can handle what happens when the whole world is watching. Before I could respond, he grabbed Vanessa's arm and stormed toward the exit, his entourage scrambling to follow. Several guests looked uncomfortable, embarrassed to be associated with his behavior, but nobody else left. If anything, the room felt lighter without his presence, like a dark cloud had lifted. Dr. Chen put a gentle hand on my shoulder. Don't let him intimidate you. Men like that prey on others' fear. I'm not afraid, I said, and realized it was true. Something had shifted inside me during that performance. The door I'd closed 8 years ago had been kicked back open, and I wasn't going to let anyone shut it again. I accept his challenge too, Catherine smiled. That's the spirit. Come, let's exchange contact information. We have a lot to arrange before Friday. As they led me away to discuss details, I caught Marcus watching me with an expression of wonder. The server he'd barely noticed for 3 months had just turned his world upside down, but I couldn't fully enjoy the moment. Because as much as I wanted to believe this was the end of the story, I knew it was only the beginning. Harrison Blackwell had made a threat, and men with his wealth and connections could turn threats into reality. The question wasn't whether he would try to destroy me. The question was whether I was strong enough to withstand it. What I didn't know then was that, while everyone had been focused on the confrontation, on the music, on the dramatic revelations, Harrison had already been working his phone in the corner, sending texts, making calls, setting in motion a campaign of sabotage that would test every ounce of strength I possessed. But I also didn't know that I wasn't alone anymore. That Dr. Chen, Catherine, and dozens of others who'd witnessed what happened tonight would stand with me. That sometimes, when you're willing to be vulnerable, to show the world who you really are despite the risk, unexpected allies emerge from the shadows. As I left the Grand Hotel that night, still wearing my server's uniform, clutching Catherine's business card like a lifeline, I looked up at the San Francisco sky, stars barely visible through the city lights, but there nonetheless. I did it, Abuela, I whispered to the night. I finally played again, and somewhere, I imagined I could feel her pride wrapping around me like a blanket, warming me against whatever storms were coming. The next week transformed into a whirlwind that made my head spin. Catherine Montgomery moved with the efficiency of someone who'd spent decades getting things done in a world that didn't always want to cooperate. By Monday morning, I had access to a private rehearsal space at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. By Monday afternoon, I'd been fitted for 3 different performance gowns by a designer who insisted everything was taken care of. Tuesday brought a vocal coach. Even pianists need to breathe properly, she explained, and a stage presence consultant who taught me how to walk, bow, and acknowledge applause. It felt absurd and essential all at once. Wednesday, Dr. Chen called personally to check on my progress. How are you holding up? He asked. Honestly, I feel like I'm in a dream. I'm afraid to wake up from. Good dreams are worth fighting for, he said. I've sent the program coordinator a list of suggested repertoire for Friday, but the final choice is yours. Whatever speaks to you. I spent Wednesday night unable to sleep, staring at sheet music spread across my tiny apartment's floor. Debussy? Too delicate for what this needed to be. Liszt? Too showy. Beethoven? Close but not quite right. It was Thursday morning, drinking terrible instant coffee as sunlight crept through my kitchen window. When it hit me, I didn't need to play someone else's story. I needed to play my own. I opened my laptop and started working on something I'd been composing in fragments for years. Bits and pieces written on napkins during slow shifts. Hummed melodies recorded on my phone at 2 a.m. Harmonic progressions worked out in my head. While scrubbing floors, a piece that wove together the klezmer melodies Abuela had taught me with the jazz harmonies I'd absorbed in the bars where I'd played, with the classical structure that was my foundation. It was risky. It was unconventional. It was me. While I worked, Harrison Blackwell was building his campaign of destruction with the methodical precision that had made him a billionaire. He called 17 music critics personally. Not just any critics. The most influential voices in classical music. The New York Times, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Wall Street Journal, Musical America, Gramophone. He told them all the same carefully crafted story. "I've discovered something disturbing," he'd say, his voice heavy with concern. "A young woman is trying to pass herself off as a serious musician when she has zero formal training. She worked some menial jobs and apparently picked up some party tricks. Now she's conned her way onto the Lincoln Center stage, and I'm worried about the damage this kind of fraud does to serious artists who've actually earned their place." Some critics dismissed him, but enough didn't. Enough were intrigued by the controversy, by the chance to be the one who exposed a fraud, by the promise of a story that would generate clicks and conversation. By Thursday evening, word had spread through the classical music world. The performance on Friday had gone from a routine young artist showcase to the event everyone would be watching. Harrison's social media post went live at 8 p.m. Thursday. His Instagram account, with its 200,000 followers of tech entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, and society figures, featured a screenshot of my employee badge photo from the catering company. I looked tired in it, my hair pulled back, no makeup, the defeated expression of someone at the end of a double shift. The caption read, "Tomorrow night, at Lincoln Center. Watch an untrained server try to convince the classical music world she's the next great talent. Ambition without earned skill. Arrogance without foundation. Should be educational for everyone involved. 8 p.m. David Geffen Hall. Come witness what happens when social media hype meets actual expertise." The post went viral within hours. 40,000 shares, 80,000 comments. Half the internet was mocking me sight unseen. The other half was outraged at Harrison's cruelty. But the result was the same. Everyone would be watching. My phone exploded with notifications. Friends I hadn't heard from in years, sending concerned messages. Strangers both supporting and attacking me. By midnight, I had to turn it off completely just to breathe. Vanessa tried to warn him. I found out later that she'd gone to her father Thursday night, anxiety written all over her face. "Dad, what if she really is that good? What if you're wrong?" Harrison was in his home office, a room that overlooked San Francisco Bay, furnished with pieces that cost more than most people's houses. He didn't even look up from his phone, where he was monitoring the viral spread of his post. Impossible. People like her always break under real pressure. Always. She might have some technical skill. I'll grant her that. But performing for drunk party guests and performing for serious critics are completely different things. She'll freeze, or make mistakes, or simply reveal that she doesn't belong at that level. And when she does, everyone will see that I was right. "But if you're wrong." "I'm not wrong," he snapped, finally looking at her. "I've spent 30 years evaluating people, their capabilities, their worth. I didn't build a $9 billion company by misjudging talent." What Harrison couldn't see, what his wealth and confidence blinded him to, was the fundamental difference between pressure that breaks and pressure that forges. He'd never faced the kind of pressure I'd lived with for 8 years. the pressure of choosing between music and survival, of working 3 jobs while watching your mother waste away, of holding on to a dream with bleeding fingers, because letting go meant accepting defeat. His threats, his critics, his social media attacks, they were nothing compared to the real battles I'd already survived. Friday arrived with cruel swiftness. I barely slept Thursday night, finally drifting off around 4 a.m. only to wake at 6:30 to my alarm. My hands were steady as I showered and dressed. The terror I'd expected never came. Instead, there was a strange calm, the kind that settles over you when you've already decided to walk through fire and you're just waiting for the match to strike. Catherine picked me up at 2 p.m. We flew to New York on a private jet. Her husband was a tech investor with more money than taste. She'd explained with a wry smile. The flight gave us time to talk. "How are you really doing?" she asked as we cruised above the clouds. "I keep thinking about my mom," I admitted. "She died 3 years ago. Stage 4. In the end. But before that, when she could still speak clearly, she told me she was proud of me for choosing family over music. She said I'd made the right choice." "Do you regret it?" I considered the question honestly. No. But I regret that I had to choose it all. That's the part that makes me angry. Not at her, not at the circumstances, at a world where talent goes to waste because people can't afford to pursue it, at a system where someone like Harrison Blackwell can spend more on a watch than it would cost to fund 10 music students through 4 years of conservatory. Catherine nodded. "That's why tonight matters. Not just for you. For everyone watching, who's been told they don't belong, because they weren't born into the right circumstances." We landed in New York at 5 p.m. A car took us directly to Lincoln Center. The David Geffen Hall rose before us, all glass and limestone, a modern temple to music. I'd walked past it once, years ago, when I'd come to New York for the Van Cliburn competition. I'd stood outside and promised myself I'd perform there someday. 8 years later, here I was, but not how I'd imagined. Dr. Chen met us backstage. "The house is packed," he said. "Over 2,000 people. And yes, all of Harrison's critics are here. Front row center." He made sure of that. "Let them watch," I said, and meant it. The dressing room was quiet. I sat before the mirror, applying minimal makeup. I'd never been good at it, never had the time or money to learn. The woman looking back at me was both stranger and familiar. Maya Rodriguez, server, dishwasher, sight reading specialist for desperate event coordinators. Also, Van Cliburn competition winner. Turned down Curtis Institute scholar. Granddaughter of Carmen Rodriguez who'd played piano in the Bronx until arthritis claimed her hands. So many versions of myself, all true, all in conflict. Someone knocked. 15 minutes, Miss Rodriguez." I stood, smoothing down the black dress Catherine had chosen. Simple, elegant, nothing that would distract from the music. My hands flexed, warming up with exercises. Abuela had taught me when I was 6. "Okay, Abuela," I whispered to my reflection. "Let's tell them our story." The walk from the dressing room to the stage wings felt both endless and instantaneous. I could hear the crowd through the curtain, 2,000 conversations creating a low rumble like distant thunder. Somewhere in that mass of people sat Harrison Blackwell and his hired critics, pens ready to tear me apart. The stage manager touched my arm. "Ready?" "Yes." The lights in the house dimmed. The conversations quieted to whispers, then to silence. Dr. Chen walked onto the stage to introduce me. Through a gap in the curtain, I could see him clearly, see the audience beyond. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried authority and warmth. "Tonight we continue our Young Artists series with a performer who comes to us through unusual circumstances. Maya Rodriguez has no formal conservatory training. She's never studied with the prestigious teachers whose names would impress you. Instead, she learned music from her grandmother in the Bronx. And she refined her skills through 8 years of playing wherever life took her. Restaurants, bars, weddings, anywhere that needed a musician and couldn't afford to be particular." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter from the audience. Some people weren't sure if this was inspiration or insult, But I heard Maya play last week in San Francisco, Dr. Chen continued, his voice strengthening. And I'm here to tell you that she possesses something no school can teach, and no amount of money can buy. She has that rarest of gifts, the ability to make music breathe with genuine emotion, the ability to tell truth through sound. Tonight, she'll be performing an original composition, something she's crafted over years of observation, struggle and survival. I ask that you listen with open hearts, he gestured to the wings. Ladies and gentlemen, Maya Rodriguez. This was it. No more hiding. No more serving drinks while pretending I wasn't dying inside every time I heard music. No more making myself small and invisible to survive. I walked onto that stage. The applause was polite, cautious. In the front row, I could see them, 17 critics. Notepads ready, expressions ranging from skeptical to hostile. 3 rows back, Harrison Blackwell sat like a king at an execution. Vanessa beside him looking miserable. Their social circle surrounding them. But I also saw other faces. Catherine Montgomery, smiling with tears already in her eyes. Dr. Chen, pride evident in his expression. And scattered throughout the audience, regular people who'd come just to see what the viral controversy was about. Curious if I was fraud or Phoenix, I reached the piano. Another Steinway, this one perhaps even finer than the one in San Francisco. I adjusted the bench, sat, looked out at 2,000 faces, 2,000 judgments waiting to be rendered, and then I simply closed my eyes and began to play. The piece I'd written had no formal name yet. In my mind, I called it Abuela's Legacy, though I hadn't told anyone that. It started quietly, almost hesitantly, with a klezmer melody my grandmother had taught me when I was 6. A song, she'd said, that her own grandmother had played in Warsaw before the war, before everything was lost. The melody was mournful, but not hopeless. It spoke of memory, of things precious, that endure even when everything else is destroyed. My left hand provided simple accompaniment, just enough to support the naked vulnerability of that ancient tune. Then, slowly, the harmony began to shift. Jazz chords crept in, unexpected but natural, like weeds growing through cracks in concrete, beautiful, insistent, refusing to be ignored. The bass line started walking, taking on the rhythm of city streets, of working-class neighborhoods, where music spilled from open windows and corner stores. This was the Bronx. This was my childhood. This was Abuela teaching me to play on a piano so old and battered it could barely hold tune. But it was ours, and that made it precious. The tempo increased gradually. The melody fragmented and reconstructed itself with modern harmonies, classical techniques applied to music that had never lived in concert halls. I could feel the piece building, taking the audience on a journey through time and space, through cultural collision and synthesis, through loss and endurance. I let myself remember everything. Mom's diagnosis, delivered in a sterile hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and fear. The night I'd written the email declining Curtis Institute's offer, crying so hard I could barely see the screen. The first time I'd played piano in a dive bar for tips, feeling both ashamed and grateful. Every slight, every dismissal, every moment of being invisible, but also the victories. The elderly man at a wedding who'd tipped me $50 because I'd played his dead wife's favorite song. The bartender who'd let me stay after closing to practice on the out-of-tune upright in the corner. The bride who'd hugged me and said I'd made her ceremony perfect. The small, quiet moments when music had been enough, when it had been everything. The piece moved through different movements without pause, one flowing into the next, like memories tumbling over each other. There was darkness, minor passages that spoke of struggle, of medical bills, and night shifts and exhaustion. There was rage, percussive dissonant sections that channeled every unfair moment, every time the world had said, "You don't belong." But there was also light. Major key resolutions that emerged like sunrise after endless night, triumphant passages that declared survival, that insisted on joy even when joy seemed impossible. The music became a conversation between despair and hope, slowly, insistently, began to win. I opened my eyes and saw the audience transfixed. Some were crying openly. Others sat motionless, barely breathing, caught in the story the music was telling. Even the critics in the front row had set down their pens, their professional detachment crumbling in the face of something they couldn't dismiss or categorize. Harrison Blackwell's face had gone pale. He looked ill, actually physically ill, one hand pressed to his chest as if something hurt there. Beside him, Vanessa wept silently, mascara streaking her cheeks. I built toward the finale, bringing back all the themes I'd introduced. The klezmer melody, now transformed, and triumphant. The jazz harmonies, no longer tentative but bold. The classical structure, providing framework and dignity to music that came from the streets and the struggle. This was my life, translated into sound. This was 8 years of silence ending in a declaration that I would not be erased, would not be forgotten, would not accept that my worth was determined by circumstances beyond my control. The final measures came from someplace beyond technique, beyond training. They came from my soul, whatever that means. From the part of me that had survived everything and refused to break. A ascending passage that seemed to lift the very air in the hall, climbing higher and higher, reaching for something just beyond grasp. And then, resolution. Perfect, beautiful, hard-earned resolution. The final chord rang through David Geffen Hall like a bell, like a pronouncement, like a promise finally kept. I held it, let it fade naturally, the sound dying so slowly it seemed reluctant to leave. And when the last vibration finally disappeared into silence, the audience sat frozen for exactly 5 seconds. Then the dam broke. The applause started as a roar and built from there. People leapt to their feet. Someone shouted, "Brava!" Others joined in. The sound was overwhelming, physical, a wave of approval and recognition and emotion that made the hall itself seem to shake. I stood from the piano, my legs unsteady, and turned to face them. To face all of them, the critics who'd come to destroy me, the society figures who'd come to watch me fail, the regular people who'd come out of curiosity. All of them were standing. All of them were applauding with a fervor that felt almost violent in its intensity. The ovation went on. 1 minute, 2, 3, 4 full minutes of thunderous applause that showed no signs of stopping. Dr. Chen appeared at my elbow, tears streaming down his face, pulling me into an embrace. Catherine had rushed from her seat and made it onto the stage somehow, hugging me so tight I could barely breathe. But then something happened that no one expected. From the back of the hall, moving slowly down the center aisle came an elderly woman. She was tiny, barely 5 feet tall, her back bent with age, but she moved with determination. She wore a simple floral dress and carried herself with the dignity of someone who'd survived things most people couldn't imagine. The applause began to die as people noticed her, whispers spreading through the crowd. I squinted, trying to see clearly through my tears and the stage lights, and then, "Abuela?" The word came out as a broken whisper into the microphone. Dr. Chen had forgotten was clipped to his jacket, Carmen Rodriguez, my grandmother. Abuela, who I'd been told died 3 years ago while searching for her family's roots in Poland, who'd disappeared without a trace, leaving me convinced she'd met with tragedy, who I'd mourned and missed every single day since. She was alive. She was here. She was real. I ran. Actually ran off the stage, down the steps, up the aisle, my expensive dress nearly tripping me. I reached her and fell to my knees, wrapping my arms around her, sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe. "Muñata," she murmured, her weathered hands cupping my face. "Mi tesoro, my treasure. You're alive," I gasped. "You're here." I thought everyone said, "I know, mi amor. I know." Her voice was the same. That accent of old Poland, mixed with decades in New York. The voice that had narrated my childhood. I had to disappear for a time, to find things that were lost, to make things right, but I never stopped watching over you. I knew where you were. I knew what you were doing. I knew you were waiting for your moment. The entire hall had gone silent again. everyone watching this reunion with confusion and growing understanding. Dr. Chen brought the microphone to us. "Ma'am, you're Maya's grandmother?" "Yes," Abuela said, her voice stronger now, projecting with the authority of someone used to being heard. "Carmen Rodriguez." And since everyone is watching, she looked at the cameras recording everything, at the audience hanging on every word. Perhaps they should know the whole truth. "She helped me to my feet, though I was the one who should have been helping her." Together we walked back toward the stage. Dr. Chen offered her his arm, which she took with a gracious nod. And together the three of us stood before 2,000 people and untold thousands watching online. "My granddaughter," Abuela began, her English accented but clear, "won the Van Cliburn International Piano Competition Junior Division when she was 16 years old. She was offered full scholarships to Curtis Institute, Juilliard, the New England Conservatory. She could have studied with anyone, gone anywhere." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several critics pulled out their phones, presumably to verify this claim. "But her mother, my daughter, got sick. Cancer. The bills." Abuela's voice cracked slightly. "They were crushing us. Insurance covered some, but not enough. Never enough. And Maya, my beautiful, foolish, wonderful granddaughter, she made a choice. She turned down the scholarships. She went to work." Abuela turned to look directly at the section where Harrison sat. "For 8 years, she worked jobs that people like you never notice. She served your drinks. She cleaned your bathrooms. She played piano in restaurants and bars, sight reading whatever was put in front of her because she needed the money. She never complained. She never stopped playing. She just survived." Her gaze swept across the critics in the front row. "You came here tonight to judge her, to decide if she is worthy. But let me tell you something. She has already proven her worth in ways you will never have to. She chose love over ambition. She chose family over fame. She chose character over comfort. And still she kept her music alive. That is not fraud. That is not deception. That is heroism." The applause started again, but Abuela held up a hand and it died. "One more thing," she said, and now her voice hardened, took on an edge. "I remembered from childhood when she was correcting someone who'd been cruel. Last week a very wealthy man tried to humiliate my granddaughter. He thought he could use his money and his power to crush a young woman who was working an honest job. He thought her circumstances gave him the right to mock her, to treat her as entertainment for his rich friends." She pointed directly at Harrison. Every eye followed her gesture. Cameras swiveled to capture his face, which had drained of all color. "That man sits there now. Harrison Blackwell. He came here tonight, hoping to watch my Maya fail. He brought critics to destroy her. He posted on social media to humiliate her. He used every advantage his wealth provides to try to break someone he saw as inferior." Abuela's voice dropped to something quiet but infinitely more dangerous. "But he did not understand that true talent needs no privilege. It needs no silver spoons or famous last names. It grows in hardship. It strengthens through struggle. My granddaughter is standing here tonight, not despite her circumstances, but because of them. Every hardship made her stronger. Every dismissal made her more determined. Every moment of being invisible taught her to see clearly." The hall erupted in applause again, but this time it was different. This was righteousness, vindication, the collective voice of everyone who'd ever been underestimated or dismissed because they didn't fit the expected mold. Catherine started it first, rising to her feet and clapping with deliberate slowness, her eyes locked on Harrison. Others in the section joined her. Then more. Within seconds, the entire hall was standing again. But now the applause had taken on an accusatory quality. Everyone looking at Harrison Blackwell as they clapped for the woman he'd tried to destroy. Harrison tried to stand, to leave, but Vanessa gripped his arm. "No, Dad. I saw her mouth. You stay. You face this." For perhaps the first time in his life, Harrison Blackwell sat powerless while judgment rained down around him. The aftermath unfolded with the speed and inevitability of an avalanche. By Saturday morning, the video of my performance had 20 million views. By Sunday, it had crossed 40 million. By Monday, it was the #1 trending topic across every platform, spawning countless think pieces about class, privilege, and the hidden talents of working people. The critics Harrison had brought to destroy me instead wrote glowing reviews. The New York Times critic renowned for his harsh assessments wrote, "In 30 years of reviewing performances, I have rarely been moved to tears." Maya Rodriguez's original composition, Abuela's Legacy, is not merely technically proficient, it is emotionally devastating. She doesn't just play music, she excavates truth from the piano and forces us to confront it. This is artistry at its highest level. The Wall Street Journal. Rodriguez proves that the greatest art often comes from those who've had to fight for it. Musical America. A triumph that transcends technique to touch something fundamental about the human experience. But it wasn't just the critics. The real impact came from regular people who shared the video with their own stories of talent suppressed by circumstances, of dreams deferred for survival, of the daily indignity of being treated as less than by those who've never known struggle. Harrison Blackwell's original post, the one meant to humiliate me, became the most shared example of privilege and cruelty in years. His face became a meme, a symbol of everything wrong with wealth inequality and social stratification. The screenshot of him pale and shocked during my performance appeared in 1,000 contexts, always with the same message. This is what happens when you confuse price with value. The consequences for him came swiftly. By Tuesday, 3 major tech companies he'd invested in requested he step down from their boards. His venture capital firm's other partners called an emergency meeting. By Wednesday, 2 cultural institutions he'd supported financially publicly returned his donations, stating they could not in good conscience accept money from someone who so clearly contradicted their mission of supporting diverse talent. His social circle evaporated. Event invitations were rescinded. The society circles that had courted him now treated him like a pariah. Money could buy a lot, but it couldn't buy back a reputation destroyed by your own cruelty. Vanessa, in a move that shocked even me, published an open letter 3 days after the concert. I was raised believing that my value came from where I studied, who my family knew, how much money we had. I was taught that success was something you inherited, not something you earned through sacrifice and struggle. My father's treatment of Maya Rodriguez was wrong. His cruelty was wrong, but it also revealed something I'd been too comfortable to see, that I've been coasting on privilege while people with far more talent than me struggle for recognition. I'm taking a break from performing. I'm going to teach music to underserved communities. I'm going to try to understand what real art costs, what it means to fight for your passion instead of having it handed to you on a silver platter. I'm going to try to be better than I was raised to be. The letter went viral too. Comments flooded in, some praising her courage, others dismissing it as performative. But I read it and saw something genuine in the words. Growth is painful, and Vanessa was at least trying to grow. For me, everything moved at light speed. Catherine set up meetings with recording labels. Dr. Chen introduced me to conductors who wanted to commission new works. By the end of the week, I had offers from 3 major classical labels. I signed with Deutsche Grammophon, the prestigious German classical label, because they understood what I wanted to do. Create a debut album that blended classical technique with the music of working-class communities. Abuela's Legacy would be the title track, but I'd also include arrangements of klezmer standards, jazz compositions from the bars where I'd played, pieces that told the stories of people like me. Part of the advance went to establishing the Carmen Rodriguez Foundation, providing full scholarships to talented musicians from low-income families. The first recipient was a 13-year-old kid from Detroit who played saxophone in the subway, whose YouTube videos showed raw talent that would have gone to waste without support. 3 weeks after the concert, on a Wednesday afternoon, my doorbell rang in my Bronx apartment. The same tiny place I'd shared with Mom and Abuela years ago. The place I'd somehow never been able to leave, despite everything. I opened the door to find Harrison Blackwell standing there. He looked different. Smaller. Somehow. The arrogance had been replaced by something that looked almost like humility. though I suspected it was more like defeat. He held an envelope in his hand. "I know I have no right to be here," he said without preamble. His voice was hoarse, tired. "I know an apology would be meaningless. But I came because I need to do something, even if it's inadequate." He held out the envelope. "This is a check. It's enough to fund 10 years of music education at any institution you choose, for yourself or others. Private lessons, living expenses, everything. I know it doesn't fix what I did. I know it doesn't make me less of a villain in this story. But it's what I can offer." I looked at the envelope, but didn't take it. "Why?" I asked. "Why did you do it? Why did you need to humiliate me?" Harrison was quiet for a long moment. "Because you threatened me," he finally said. "Not physically, obviously. But you represented something terrifying that worth exists outside of the systems I understand. I've spent my entire life in a world where value is measurable, where everything has a price. Money, status, connections, these are the currencies I know. And then you appeared. Someone who'd sacrificed everything those things could buy. And you possessed something I could never purchase. It was threatening. So I tried to destroy it. To prove it wasn't real, wasn't valuable. Because if it was real, if it was valuable, then maybe everything I'd built my life on was hollow." He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "My daughter told me I've spent 30 years confusing price with value. She was right. You've made me see that. Painfully, publicly, but necessarily." I took the envelope, but not for the reasons he probably expected. "I'll accept this," I said slowly, "but not for me. I want you to donate this money to arts programs in underprivileged schools, to places where kids like me grow up, where talent dies because people can't afford to pursue it. Can you do that?" Something flickered in Harrison's face. Surprise, maybe? A respect? "Yes," he said. "I can do that. I will do that." "Good." I started to close the door, then paused. "Mr. Blackwell, what you did was cruel and wrong. But thank you." "For what?" He looked genuinely confused. "For underestimating me. You gave me the push I needed. The anger, the motivation. You reminded me why my music matters. Why I can't let circumstances define me. So thank you. You were the villain I needed to become the hero of my own story." I closed the door before he could respond. 6 months later, I stood on stage at Carnegie Hall for my debut album release concert. The house was sold out. In the audience sat Dr. Chen, Catherine Montgomery, Marcus, from the hotel who'd gotten promoted after the viral video brought prestige to the Grand, and dozens of other people who'd helped me reach this moment. Abuela sat in the front row, in the seat of honor, her face radiant with pride. Beside her, in an unexpected twist, sat Vanessa Blackwell. She'd enrolled in a music education program at NYU and had reached out months earlier, asking if we could talk. We'd met for coffee, and in that conversation, I'd seen someone genuinely trying to unlearn everything toxic she'd been taught. We weren't quite friends, but we weren't enemies either. Growth takes many forms. Harrison Blackwell wasn't there. But I'd heard he'd kept his word. $5 million donated to music programs in underserved schools across Miami, New York, and Chicago. It wouldn't undo what he'd done, but it was something. Sometimes, people don't get redemption arcs. Sometimes, they just get the chance to be slightly less terrible, and that has to be enough. My debut album, Abuela's Legacy, debuted at #1 on the classical charts and crossed over to the Billboard 200, peaking at number 17. Critics called it revolutionary, genre-defying, the sound of classical music's future. But the reviews I treasured most came from working people who wrote to say the music spoke to them, that it told their stories, that it made them feel seen. A year after the San Francisco Charity Gala, a journalist from The Guardian tracked me down for a long-form profile. Near the end of the interview, she asked, "Do you hold any resentment toward Harrison Blackwell?" I thought about it carefully. Resentment? No. I'm grateful, actually. He tried to break me, but instead he freed me. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives are also the most transformative. He gave me a stage, thinking he'd use it to humiliate me. Instead, I used it to show the world who I really was. I leaned forward. I want to say something to everyone watching or reading this who's ever been underestimated, dismissed or humiliated because of where they came from or what circumstances forced them into. Your value is not determined by people with more money or status. It's not determined by the schools you couldn't afford or the opportunities you never got. Your worth is determined by what you carry inside yourself. Your character, your perseverance, your refusal to let hardship define you. And that's something no one can take away, no matter how hard they try. The video of that interview became another viral moment, spawning the hashtag #RealValue that people use to share their own stories of surviving, persevering, and ultimately triumphing, despite circumstances that should have crushed them. But my favorite moment came quietly, without cameras or fanfare. It was a Thursday evening, 6 months after Carnegie Hall. I was scheduled to play at a small community center in the Bronx, a free concert for neighborhood residents. The piano was an old upright, barely in tune, the kind I'd learned on as a child. I played Abuela's Legacy for an audience of about 60 people. Elderly residents, working parents who'd come straight from their shifts, kids dragged along by their families. When I finished, the applause was warm, but not overwhelming. These weren't music critics or society figures. They were just regular people. But then a young girl, maybe 8 years old, approached shyly. "That was real pretty," she said. "Do you think I could learn to play like that?" I knelt down to her level. "Do you have a piano at home?" "No, ma'am. But the church has one." "Then yes," I said firmly. "You can absolutely learn to play like that. It's not about having money, or connections, or being born into the right family. It's about loving music enough to keep going, even when it's hard. Can you do that?" Her eyes went wide. "Yes, ma'am." "Then you're already halfway there." I gave her my email address, told her to contact me when she was ready to start lessons. Her mother thanked me with tears in her eyes. That night, walking back to my apartment, I still lived in the Bronx, had bought the building actually, renovated it into affordable housing with music practice rooms. I thought about that night, at the San Francisco Charity Gala, about Harrison Blackwell's cruel challenge, about the moment I chose to walk to that piano instead of walking away. Every choice we make creates ripples we can't foresee. Harrison had wanted to humiliate me, to put me in my place. Instead, he'd inadvertently given me a platform that changed my life and touched thousands of others. His cruelty had become my opportunity. His attempt to prove my worthlessness had proven the opposite. The universe has a sense of irony like that sometimes. I stopped at the corner where Abuela's apartment building stood, lights glowing in the windows. She was up there, probably making café con leche, probably waiting for me to come tell her about the concert. At 78, she was still sharp as ever, still my anchor, still the person who'd believed in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. I pulled out my phone and looked at the notifications I'd been ignoring all evening. Among the messages was one from Dr. Chen. "Maya, the Vienna Philharmonic wants to discuss a collaboration." Interested, Vienna, where Mozart and Beethoven had walked, where classical music had been born and refined over centuries. They wanted to work with a girl from the Bronx who'd learned piano from her grandmother and kept her skills alive by playing in bars. I smiled and typed back, "Absolutely interested," because that's the thing about value, about worth, about talent that comes from genuine struggle and love. It doesn't need permission. It doesn't need the right pedigree or the perfect circumstances. It just needs an opportunity, a stage, a moment to breathe and show itself. Harrison Blackwell had tried to deny me that opportunity. Instead, he'd given me the biggest stage of all, and I'd used it to prove that some things, character, art, the human spirit, are truly priceless. They can't be bought, can't be sold, and can't be destroyed by those who mistake wealth for worth. That's the lesson I carried forward. That's what I taught to the scholarship students who came through the Carmen Rodriguez Foundation. That's what I tried to embody in every performance, every interview, every moment I had a platform. The best revenge isn't destruction. It's creation. It's building something so authentic, so powerful, so undeniably valuable, that your critics are forced to recognize what they tried to dismiss. It's taking the stage they meant as your humiliation and transforming it into your coronation. It's playing your heart out on a piano worth $250,000 while wearing a server's uniform, and making everyone in that room, including the man who tried to destroy you, understand that worth has nothing to do with circumstances, and everything to do with what you choose to do when those circumstances try to break you. I chose to play. I chose to be seen. I chose to transform cruelty into opportunity, and in the end, that choice changed everything.